Welcome to another episode of the Online Prosperity Experience podcast. You're about to hear your host, Prosper Taravinga's powerful digital marketing strategies and actionable tactics that you can use right now. Prosper has helped more than 50,000 people from over 10 countries to create meaningful businesses that are profitable and enjoyable. Listen to this podcast so that you too can build your own business with less stress and overwhelm. Let's get started.
How good are best practices after all? You see, the goal for every coach, consultant, or small business owner is to get more clients and customers and maybe generate more revenue and grow their business. And I just assume that's your goal as well. And maybe the reason you're listening to this podcast is so that you get somewhat of a shortcut or best practices so that you too can have a business that's profitable and enjoyable. And rightfully so. Any person that's wanting to go somewhere would want to find a way that gets them there cheaper, better, faster, and usually best practices are the place to start off. But too often we follow these best practices blindly. We don't apply our own critical thinking and problem solving skills to adapt them to any specific situation that we're going through. And I acknowledge that best practices can be helpful, but they're just merely a starting point, and we don't have to adjust them to actually fit our own specific situation. Also, there's thousands of blogs, books, podcasts, videos that talk about these best practices. It's either in marketing or in whatever industry that you're in, and they cover every topic imaginable because people are always looking for a shortcut. And it could be in sales, it could be in customer experience, it could be in books, it could be in business, it actually could be in dating. People always look for what are the best practices, so that maybe it's because of our innate desire not to mess things up and not actually discover, our true selves in the process. Now, as consumers of information about how we can improve ourselves, how we can actually make our businesses profitable and enjoyable, and how we can actually live our best lives, the best thing to do is to obviously go and find out what other people are already doing so you can actually start off from there. And I believe we're here to live, we're here to learn, and we're here to contribute. And most of the learning that we're doing is learning from other people's experiences or our own experiences. But most of us tend to just want to scrap the surface and look at what are the best practices so that they don't have to go in and actually learn a lot of these things ourselves. And I know a lot of us just go in with the mindset that if I just know what the best practice is, I will apply it into my business, I'll apply it into my life, and I'll apply it into my relationships, and we'll be doing the very best things that we can be doing with the least amount of effort, and I definitely will see huge performance improvements in whatever it is that you're looking to improve. But the problem with best practice is that they're only best in a specific context. That is, it's best for others, and not necessarily best for you for a whole number of reasons. You see, your business might have different strategies and goals. Your business might have different products or services. Your business might be targeting different types of customers, and even the customers themselves might be different. So in reality, what we call best practices can only be very general, just mere instructions or directions that maybe we can follow or not, make them our ultimate strategy that we rely most on, and nothing can ever address our individual situation, in the context that we're actually facing at that particular moment. Even the best practices within our own businesses have limitations in and of themselves, because they can't address every single context or situation that we're facing. And you might be asking yourself now, so does he say all of these things so that we can start abandoning best practices? Well, I'll be, discovering and, unearthing a lot of these things with you today on this podcast. But I'm not absolutely saying abandon best practices. I mean, best practices still have a lot to do with utility and maybe relevance. There is truth in every joke, there is truth in every statement. We just gotta see if it actually applies to our particular situation. So, like I said earlier on, best practices just give us a starting point, and they enable us to understand, the generality of what other people might have gone through, and things that could have been effective or impactful. Now, the reason why this is actually very touchy subject for me is because today I was watching my little girl make her own breakfast. She's 7 years old right now, and for the past 5 years, she's sort of been making her own breakfast. So she chooses her own cereal, puts her own milk, and she's got unique milk, soy milk, and the rest of the family drinks full cream milk. Yeah, I know we're that kind of family, but I think this is now normal with everybody else. But when she was growing up, I had teeth problems, and I still do, but now my teeth have sort of been fixed. And sometimes my teeth were very sensitive to cold milk. So when I would be making breakfast, I would first put my I'll put my cereal in the microwave. Not that it is a step towards creating a healthy breakfast or anything of that sort, but today I saw her. She took her breakfast cereal, put milk in, and straight into the microwave. And I asked her, "Why do you put it in the microwave first?" And then she says, "I've always seen you do that," And for me, I then answered my question. Wait a minute. For the reason why I was doing that was because my teeth were sensitive. She doesn't have that problem. Now, how many other things are we just following blindly just because it's always been like that? So too often we follow the best practices blindly simply because they might be coming from people that we respect, or people that we think have already achieved some sort of authority around what it is that they're talking. So we just follow these things blindly. We don't actually apply our own critical thinking in problem solving skills and adapt them to our own specific situation. And in some ways, people who actually present these best practices, they hopefully, and I'm saying this with utmost love and respect, maybe will be telling you that it's a best practice to do things a certain way because it has worked for them, and it might not work for everybody else. These things have not been tested on mass market or different scenarios that were not a controlled environment that would have achieved the results that somebody would go out and say, "Hey, I think this is the best way to conduct this activity in such a way." So like I was saying, to my daughter, the warming up of her cereal is now part of her breakfast making steps, and nobody can ever tell her any different or convince her that that's not how it's done, because she's always done it like that. So best practices are best for a reason, right? I mean, you probably heard people say that best practices are the same thing as stereotypes. There might be a grain of truth behind some of these stereotypes, but mostly they're just an excuse for lazy thinking. And I find that especially with marketing as well. You see, we've got all of these marketing best practices, supposedly tried and true guidelines that other people have, maybe done and executed within their business. And some of them are now cliche. Some of them no longer work. Okay, so for example, I remember when we were growing up, we had the Nokia type phones, and when the Nokia phone came, you could actually replace the battery, and half of the time when the phone came in, the battery was not fully charged. But you will find that if somebody opens up a new iPhone or a new Samsung, in this day and age, it already comes half charged so that you can literally use it as soon as you put your SIM card in. But a lot of people will still want to leave their phone charging overnight because that's how it's always been done. I was just laughing, because no one can tell you any different because it's always been like that. And somehow it is now true that whenever you get your phone new, you have to charge it overnight. And, if you really want to find the truth in that, Nokia was only doing that because batteries used to explode during shipping. But they've figured out that part, they've figured out all of that aspect. So, yes, some of the best practices are partly true and others are just based on pure assumption or maybe some hypothetical, as basically meaningless. Oh, they were true in the particular time that it was actually happening. Well, take for example the best practice that content on the internet must be brief, just simply because people's attention span is now lower than that of a goldfish. And many people actually assume that internet, people that come and searching for information on the internet don't want to deal with long form content. So a lot of content creators or content writers will always favor, just succinct content over depth. Now, recently, we've actually found the opposite to be true. Our longer blog posts tend to do a whole lot better in all the metrics abroad. We get more page views, we get more links, we get more shares, and we get more contents. Comments, on a longer form content than we do on shorter form content. And even if you look at our social media posts, hardly do we put one-liners or three-liners. We actually put paragraphs upon paragraphs. You know why? Because people actually engage with longer form content. Back in the time when screens were smaller, yes, you would admit that it's annoying to keep scrolling, and there was no scrolling. People had to push a button to go to the next line. But nowadays, now that we've got longer screens, people can actually sit down and read 3 or 4 paragraphs with one scroll. All right. So we are getting more page views, more links, and more social shares, even more content on our longer form content than we are on our shorter form content. And this is the kind of engagement that we actually care about as a business, because the more people are connecting with us with our content, the more they're actually learning from us, and the more they can actually be easily converted into customers. So we've actually changed our internal blogging practice from publish quickly and often to publish less often if necessary, in order to publish longer and more in-depth content. All right. So I think we also have a customer who's an accountant who also is obviously saying the same, that we've tried to work on longer stories, for greater impact, and publish fewer quick ones that we know you can consume elsewhere. Right. But they're eventually publishing on average maybe 2 to 3 blogs a month, which are actually getting much more engagement than the shorter ones that best practices say make sure your content is short and easily digestible. So the same goes for us. We're writing fewer total posts but meeting our content goals simply by just backing this content marketing best practice, and we found that when we're aiming for brevity, quality, and originality, it usually gets sacrificed too often. Because how can you actually say so enough for somebody to actually grasp a concept in 3 or 4 lines? All right. I mean, unless you're Donald Trump and you can tweet your way to the White House, other people are actually really consuming long form content. But that's only working for us. All right. Don't take my word for it. Try it out in your own business and figure out if best the best practice of long form content would actually work for you. So this one example of a marketing best practice that doesn't work for us, could actually, be the shining light to a lot more other things that you might be taking for granted just because somebody wrote it in a short blog post that you need to write shorter content. And maybe they get paid by the word, and you're not. And these days, we're not running out of paper, or we're not running out of tape. So you can sit on a podcast, or you can sit on a video and actually create content that matters. Let me tell you something. If something is worth somebody's attention, why do people watch 2-hour movies and can't even stand a 2-minute video that is not properly done? So if you're creating for and relating to your audience, definitely you don't have to sacrifice putting out content that's going to help people be doing and have a happier existence only because somebody mentioned a best practice that you haven't challenged or you haven't actually tested. All right. So based on the fact that we now have longer screens and wider screens and much more, interactive screens, some of these best practices might be out of date just simply because of where we have come from. All right. A lot of these marketing best practices are an equivalent of an old wife's tale. All right. There's a story about a woman who also used to, when she was making a roast, she would cut both ends of the ham, the piece of ham. And her husband didn't understand why she was doing that. And one day she asked, the husband asked her and said, "Why are you always cutting the ends of the ham? I actually like those ends, because that's where most of the crackle is." And then she's like, "I don't know. My mom has always done that, and that's that's how it's always been done." So the next time they were at his mother-in-law's place, he asked. It was like, "Sally, why do you always cut the ends of your of the ham piece?" And then it's like, "I don't know. My mom always did that, so I thought, that is what brings out the flavor in the ham, or it gets cooked faster." And when they were at their great-grandmother's place for Christmas, they asked, "Why are you always cutting the ends of the ham?" And she's like, "Well, I had a smaller oven, so the only way the piece of ham would fit was if I cut both ends, and then it would work." Now, look at your own oven right now. You've got a wider oven. You've got even 3 or 4 ovens that are working in your house right now, but you're still cutting the oven as if it's 1969. All right. So even if, these best practices have been debunked or they've fallen out of date, some of them just keep getting repeated. Some of them keep using them over and over again and taking on a life of their own. Because if something has proven true to you, you will always want to defend its own existence. And there might be a huge body of evidence that actually accrues suggesting that the best practice is actually the worst practice, but it simply refuses to die. There's a lot going on in our world right now that we're not questioning just simply because it's always been like that. And it's easy for people to just go with what has always been in order for them to make sense of the world around them. So it's really up to you, because every time you read a list of the 10 best practices in email marketing or the 10 best practices of such a marketing tactic or whatnot, you are probably looking at several tips that are already out of date and falling out of favor fast. Because once somebody goes to print with anything, already know that is already being used by other people, and that person is probably just doing it for their own personal brand. For example, I heard years ago that a shorter subject line performs better when it comes to email marketing. But there was a recent report from one of these email companies that actually contradicts that this supposed best practice. They actually found that using something like 90 characters or more in the subject line actually increased the clicks and open significantly, just probably because more characters allow you to communicate more information or more benefits. All right. And it actually sounds similar to our findings about the longer blog posts, doesn't it? All right. So that original best practice about shorter subject lines may actually date back to the time when people had smaller computer screens or smaller phones, and therefore there was less room, for their email programs to actually take it all in. Otherwise, it was all wasted characters. All right. Even if you look at Twitter, when they started, I think they were doing 120 characters when it started, but now they've opened it up to like a short blogging platform. So times change, technology changes, and the best practices don't always keep up with the changes. And you need to actually be wary of any received wisdom becoming entrenched, without sufficient evidence. And after all, this could easily swing back, the other way, just simply because you haven't, put it to a test, or you haven't actually done the work in order for you to figure out, if it's the best way to do it. I know growing your business can be tough. You're cold calling potential clients and having them hang up in your face. You're sending out hundreds of emails without even getting as much as, hey, thank you for reaching out. And you're wasting thousands of dollars on ad spend without even generating any qualified leads. And sometimes it might just feel like no one wants to buy what you're selling. And this is the time where it's so easy for you to just fall into the habit of saying, you know what, we've always done things like this. Maybe it's now a numbers game. And the more you're doing that, you're actually tarnishing your brand. So the more people you're cold calling, maybe cold calling is no longer a thing because nobody's actually picking up the phone because they are used to either texting or just getting information from other people. It used to be a best practice to follow up via phone call, but maybe with the way things are going on right now, it no longer works. It no longer is a best practice. So sometimes best practices don't work for everyone because most best practices begin as an assumption. All right. They assume that everyone is basically the same and basically wants the same things. I mean, to an extent, this is true. And I mean, people need food, they need water, they need basic stuff, shelter, and businesses exist to make money. But it's more complicated than that. You might be a coach or consultant, and your job is to offer your consulting, your training, your information, your expertise, or your paid speaking. And above it all, you need to have identified your market and clarified your message. Anybody can be an NLP coach. Anybody can have all of these modalities and everything else. But your life story and your own experience is what people buy into. All right? People like buying stuff, but they don't like being sold to. So, yes, we might have the same businesses and everything else, but are they buying into what you're putting out there? So the best practices that might work for our business may be pertaining to my own personal brand. You don't have the same personal brand as I have. So every business is offering something slightly different and has slightly different goals. All right. And especially over time, these differences become apparent. So a brand new business might simply just be trying to raise brand awareness and drive some traffic to their website, right? And to meet this goal, maybe an aggressive PPC bidding on a lot of broad match terms can actually be beneficial because they're just driving as much traffic there as possible, and maybe they want to use that PPC campaign as a way to actually identify their market. But however, that PPC, you don't always want more clicks. You probably want to raise your click-through rate, and maybe any given ad, that you put out there might be costing you a whole lot of money. These days, some people are bootstrapping their business or they're being funded. All right. So you might maybe use PPC as a way to actually convert those traffic into leads, or some people just want to raise awareness. So they might be different best practices depending on what your goals are. All right. So maybe you're giving something away like free shipping or whatever it is because you've got a business arrangement with the post office or with a courier, and other people don't have that. So don't assume that it is a best practice to be putting out shipping out there, because maybe you're sending, or your products are flat and it's easy for the post office to send them. Most products that are being sold on e-commerce businesses or on online shops are irregular objects that need special care. All right, because you don't want, let's say you're a florist, that your flowers are put in the same van that has got boxes with books in them. Obviously, your flowers will be crushed. So the best practices for both companies are totally different, and you can't follow that. All right. So for most businesses, you need to test it on your site. You need to test your audience before you embrace any best practice. And the point that I'm trying to put across here is, as a business owner or as a coach or consultant, you yourself are in the best position to A, define what it is that you want to achieve, and B, understand the value of what it is that you're selling, because most best practices are just general. They're just vanilla. They don't make you stand apart. All right? They can only get you part of where you want to go. So before you embrace any best practice, you want to test it on your site, you want to test it on your audience, and then take the best practice that has worked for you, and then maybe double down on that instead of just going into things mindlessly, because best practices just simply become cliches. All right? You see, I've said it before that best practices are always being repeated and passed around even when they are no longer true. All right. The other problem with their prevalence in the marketing culture is that they become cliches. All right. That is to say, it's hard to stand out if you're just following best practices. Now, best practices in and of themselves, they're boring because everyone else is doing it. Everyone else is following them. And the goal in marketing is to never blend in. No matter what you do, you want to be standing out. You want to stand out and be remembered. Okay? It's like playing a game of Tetris. If you blend in, you disappear. But if you stand out, then obviously, if you don't blend in, then you at least stand out. So if you copy what seems to be working for everybody else, that's not the best way for you to stand out. Okay? At the end of the day, you will just be like anybody else. All right? I mean, I agree. If your style of writing corresponds to what is the best practice, make it relatable to your actual audience, not just you putting out stuff there just because you think that's what everybody wants to find out, or that's what everybody wants to hear. Because if these people that we're talking to, they're going to different other websites as well. So if they see the same thing on a BMW website, they just think either one of you guys is copying, and the one with the bigger, larger brand wins eventually. So best practices will eventually limit your own creativity and discovery. Because I'm just going to expand on the last point that I was talking about cliches, say that marketing best practices actually gets boring through familiarity, but they also actively inhibit you from making your own marketing discoveries. All right? Because if people don't know who you are, or if people don't can relate to you in such a way that they remember you, then it's grand opening, grand closing for you. Let me illustrate this, and let me tell you a little thing about what's called the anchoring effect, which is basically a tendency to rely heavily on an initial piece of information or an anchor. And this is how it works. Now, if somebody tells you to guess how many jelly beans are in a jar, and then tells you that the last guy guessed that there was 1,000, your guess is likely going to be affected by that number that you probably guessed. You probably say something closer to that 1,000, and you won't even guess anything further than that. Now, the problem is that initial guess of 1,000 may totally be wrong, and you have no reason to let it affect your guess. All right. But you just do, because that's the cognitive bias that is impossible to ignore. If somebody tells you it's 1,000, jelly beans in a jar, you're obviously going to think if they got 1,000 wrong, that means 1,000 is the starting point. And the same goes for marketing best practices. Even if you know you're supposed to test these best practices, the tests you come up with, are likely to use best practices as a starting point or as a yardstick. And you can then maybe get incrementally better from there. But you never know whether you would have, if you would have started from scratch, would you have had a completely different idea or not? All right. So at the end of the day, it's really up to you. There are a lot of reasons why you need to actually sit down with yourself. It's like meditating. Yes, you might have somebody telling you what to do and what the next step is, but we already have these answers. We are like seeds. No one is going to ever tell a seed that this is now the time to bear fruit. This is the time for you to shed your leaves. We already have these answers because we know our brains intimately than anybody else who's going to come with any best practice just because it worked for them prior. So there's so many reasons for us not to ignore them because we don't want to make a mistake. And sometimes we think that if we literally ignore all this wisdom, we'll waste a lot of time essentially reinventing the wheel. So at the end of the day, it's really up to you. Make your own best practices. Maybe figure out what other people are doing and maybe do it better. All right? Don't just follow certain examples just because that's how it's always been done. All right? Best practice or worst practice, whatever, nothing really sinks in until you actually do it and see the results for yourself. I can't wait to see what your own personal best practices will be. Bye for now.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, let's continue the conversation in the Live Long Digital community. Become a Live Long Digital community member today. This community is for ambitious entrepreneurs and small business owners with the drive to take control of the future of their businesses and achieve huge success without stress and overwhelm. As you heard, Prosper can help you by teaching you marketing strategies that work. So look no further than the Live Long Digital community of entrepreneurs and highly successful business owners. Join our community today. Find us on www.community.livelongdigital.com.au. Network with other driven entrepreneurs and find the expert guidance you need to take your business to the next level. www.community.livelongdigital.com.au